Good day. This is Solidarity News Brief, bringing you news highlighting the dignity of human life from conception to natural death. I'm Renee Trebonino.
And I'm Dominic DiCarlo. Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire deal, including hostage release, Biden says. According to the Washington Post article from January 15th, the first phase of this deal calls for a 42-day ceasefire and the release of an initial 33 hostages, U.S. officials say. A senior U.S. official, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive negotiations, said 3 hostages would be released within 48 to 72 hours of the agreement, along with the still unknown number of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. In remarks from the White House, Biden announced that U.S. hostages still in Gaza would be returned home during a 42-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Of the 7 Americans held captive in the enclave, 3 are believed to still be alive. 4 others have been declared dead.
What happens when a whole generation never grows up? As American 30-somethings increasingly bypass the traditional milestones of adulthood, and economists are warning that what seemed like a lag may in fact be a permanent state of arrested development. According to a Wall Street Journal article from December 31st, 2024, Americans in their 30s have never looked less like grown-ups. Amid steep declines in home ownership, marriage, and birth rates, economists have long been warning that young people are struggling to meet the milestones of adulthood. Although some 30-somethings are consciously choosing a less traditional path, many say these goals are simply out of reach. According to the article, 1/3 of today's young adults will never marry, projects conservative think tank the Institute for Family Studies, compared to less than 1/5 of those born in previous decades. The share of childless adults under 50 who say they are unlikely to ever have kids, meanwhile, rose 10 percentage points between 2018 and 2023. From 37% to 47%, according to the Pew Research Center. A sizable share of this generation is worse off than their parents were. Young men in particular are struggling in the labor market, and some of the traditional goals of adulthood have become more difficult to achieve. Student debt has more than doubled over the past 2 decades, yet a college degree is no guarantee of a well-paying job. Rising interest rates and dwindling supply have also put home ownership out of reach for a growing number of Americans. The median age of first-time homebuyers hit a record high of 38 this year, according to the National Association of Realtors, up from 35 in 2023 and 29 in 1981. As the American Solidarity Platform states, quote, "We believe the American economy should be reordered to place human dignity first and to recognize that the family is the basic unit of economic production. We are committed to policies that emphasize local production, family-owned businesses, and cooperative ownership structures. The state should thus reasonably ensure that work is justly compensated, safe, and does not unreasonably impinge upon those other aspects of life that are essential to the flourishing of the individual, the family, and society. Our goal is to create conditions that allow single families to support themselves with dignity. We support labor market regulations, the expansion of employee ownership, support for caregivers, and policies that address the cost of living to make a family wage a reality. The American Solidarity Party is a relatively new and growing third party which has a consistently pro-life platform and incorporates Catholic social teaching principles of subsidiarity and solidarity."
Biden gives life in prison to 37 of 40 federal death row inmates before Trump can resume executions. According to an AP News article from December 23, 2024, President Joe Biden announced that he is commuting the sentences of 37 of the 40 people on federal death row, converting their punishments to life imprisonment just weeks before President-elect Donald Trump, an outspoken proponent of expanding capital punishment, takes office. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which has long called for an end to the death penalty, said, quote, "Biden's decision is a significant step in advancing the cause of human dignity in our nation," close quote, and moves the country, quote, "a step closer to building a culture of life." The American Solidarity Platform states, "We acknowledge that capital punishment suffers from disproportionate use against those with fewer legal resources, the impossibility of reversal, and the existence of better alternatives to protect the rest of society. Therefore, we call for its abolition."
Judge rejects Biden Title IX rules, according to a New York Times article from January 9, 2025. A federal judge in Kentucky on Thursday struck down Biden's effort, ruling that the Education Department had overstepped and violated teachers' rights by requiring them to use students' preferred pronouns. Chief Judge Danny Reeves wrote, quote, "The entire point of Title IX is to prevent discrimination based on sex. Throwing gender identity into the mix eviscerates the statute and renders it largely meaningless." End of quote. The judge also rejected the revised rule on free speech grounds, writing that it, quote, "offends the First Amendment," end of quote, by potentially requiring educators to use names and pronouns associated with the student's chosen gender identity. Quote, "Put simply, the First Amendment does not permit the government to chill speech or compel affirmance of a belief with which the speaker disagrees in this manner," he wrote.
Apple has agreed to pay $95 million to settle a civil lawsuit accusing the privacy-minded company of deploying its virtual assistant Siri to eavesdrop on people using its iPhone and other devices. According to a CBS News article from January 3, 2025, the alleged recordings occurred even when people didn't seek to activate their virtual assistant with the trigger words. Some of the recorded conversations were then shared with advertisers in an attempt to sell their products to consumers more likely to be interested in the goods and services, the lawsuit asserted. Apple isn't acknowledging any wrongdoing in the settlement, which still must be approved by U.S. District Judge Jeffrey White. The settlement represents a sliver of the $705 billion in profits that Apple has pocketed since September 2014. It is also a fraction of the roughly $1.5 billion that the lawyers representing consumers had estimated Apple could have been required to pay if the company had been found guilty of violating wiretapping and other privacy laws had the case gone to a trial.
James Earl Carter Jr., the 40th President of the United States, who died at age 100 on December 29th, had been called an enigma. According to an article on firstthings.com by Daniel Lipinski on January 1st of 2025 titled, quote, "The Last Pro-Life Democrat President," end of quote, Lipinski says, quote, "Many say he was a failure as a president, but a good man who lived an exemplary life. One distinction, however, which should be receiving more attention, is the fact that may astonish anyone who does not remember Carter's term in office. Carter was a Democrat and pro-life. The Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding of abortion, was first added to a federal spending bill in the year Carter was elected president, but when he was sworn in, had yet to be implemented due to a court injunction. Carter chose Joseph Califano, a pro-life Catholic, to serve as Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. With Carter's support, Califano fought successfully to have the injunction vacated, and annual spending bills continued to include this life-saving provision. Carter held firm, and Hyde survives to this day," end of quote. According to the American Solidarity Party platform, quote, "We recognize the inalienable right to life from conception until natural death must be formally acknowledged by all levels of government. This acknowledgement includes a human life amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as well as laws that prohibit or restrict abortion at the state and federal level. In the interim, we insist that federal, state, and local governments and taxpayer funding of organizations that provide, promote, or facilitate abortions and of health care plans that include abortion coverage."
The Los Angeles area is still in the midst of devastation from the wildfires which have spread in the area, but we at Solidarity News Brief wanted to highlight a story which shows how one person can make a difference to protect life. Last week, in Altadena, California, local climate scientist Edgar McGregor, who posts hyperlocal weather updates on his Facebook page, Altadena Weather and Climate, was sounding the alarm about wildfires before the deadly blazes in the Los Angeles area even began. According to an article in People.com from January 13th, McGregor warned residents not to go to sleep, to be hypervigilant, and prepare to evacuate. Many locals listened and left. That the 24-year-old is now being credited with saving hundreds of lives and being hailed as a local hero. Quote, "I knew on December 30th that when this windstorm hit, the conditions would be carbon copies of the conditions that were on the ground in Lahaina, Hawaii, and in Paradise, California, which were both completely leveled and lost around 100 people each. I tell people, if a wildfire breaks out, there will be 1,000 homes burned down. That will be cataclysmic. Close quote. He warned his readers to turn your car to face outwards, locate all your important documents, your social security cards, your birth certificates, insurance documents, deeds to your house, things that are going to be exceedingly difficult to replace or irreplaceable, put them by the door and put them in your car and just wait and watch. As an avid hiker who also picks up trash in Eaton County every day, he knew the dry canyon was full of wildfire fuel. Downplaying his role in a humble fashion, McGregor said, quote, "I didn't run into a burning building and get third-degree burns trying to save someone's life. So people are sending me all these comments, and I'm thinking to myself, I just did my job." Close quote. Good day for now, and remember, all human life has dignity from conception to natural death.